Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in.
3 narcissists walk into a podcast studio. One looks at the other and says, Roan, we're back again.
Here we are. With the third musketeer. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, can I be a baby narcissist?
Nope.
Like
father,
full
like
blown.
son.
Full blown.
Yeah.
Full blown.
Speaking of full blown, our last episode, we were in Normandy for a minute.
That's right.
And
We were all over the
somehow Lord of the Rings came up.
Gollum showed up.
I mean, I don't know. It felt like, it's that jagged edge of creativity where the wheels were almost off the bus. As a person who suffers from anxiety, there was plenty going on for me. But the information that was produced, I think was very helpful because honestly, when people say the work or people are talking about therapy, there's still a lot of just mystery and how's this going to go? And speaking of anxiety, most people push away from it because they don't understand it, which we referenced last time we were together, but we stumbled into this topic of being offensive. And I was very proud of us, and I hope we can maintain this episode to not just start bashing culture and everybody having to get a trophy and that
what
sort of
about
thing.
church?
No. Look, I mean, there are probably 37 other episodes where we do that.
Okay, all right.
Let's try something new.
What are the limits?
Yeah.
Let's pick another one.
We began to hover around like, okay, if your therapist is actually doing their job, you're going to be unhappy leaving some of the sessions and during some of the sessions. But we do, as professionals, we're experiencing a disconnect. And it seems like the uptick is I'm supposed to feel better when I leave here, and that's just kind of a balance that we're trying to strike. You don't want to be so offensive with truth or that the person can't handle all the information and they don't ever come back. However, you also don't want to be milquetoast and just agree with everything that they say. And then we're just going to stay in the dryer for the next 2 years until you or your insurance gets tired of paying me. Right? So just to, we use this word twice now in 2 episodes now, normalize, which is probably a triggering word. Are you triggered by triggered? That I said triggered?
I am.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Love that word.
Probably an offensive.
Triggered?
Yeah. It's
I know
probably
a horse named Trigger.
We should leave it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. But to be able to say we've got to normalize resistance. I mean, for growth to occur, resistance has to be present. It's just a basic principle of life. We're trying to erase that now. But what we're saying on this podcast today, and I want to talk about for the next roughly 30 minutes, is what does that look like in practicality? What are we hoping when information is offensive? How should a person who is offended in their therapeutic relationship handle that offense, right? What are the healthy and unhealthy ways that this ends up working itself out? Having that conversation, I think, will be helpful.
Yeah, I definitely think. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind of thinking about when you are offended by your therapist on that end, but even as a therapist, when you do offend and you do, kind of speak truth, one, the therapist is not the arbiter of truth. They do not hold the truth. They don't maintain the truth. They don't even really understand the truth, right? They just call it like they see it. And so if they're calling it like they see it and you have a good join with your therapist and you trust them and you do think that they're not like trying to milk you and your insurance company for all your money and, I guess ability to get health care, if you really believe that they're for you to handle offense is kind of like in deer camp when we talk about feedback, like you as the person being offended, rather than go the easy route of defensiveness and reactivity, pause, curiously approach, like, what do you mean by that? Where did you get that from? What is that? And that, again, like we talked last time, like that's just not really the stance that most guys take. Women are way better at being offended in my experience as a therapist.
They have more practice.
They do. They really do.
Unfortunately.
They really can take a lot more than what you think that they possibly can take, you know. And I say that because women, I think maybe it's a brain issue where they're a little bit more attuned to themselves for the most part as compared to us menfolk, where we compartmentalize from this jump. Like, it's like, I think at age 5, boys go, literally it's about 5 or 6 years old is when they experience testosterone levels the exact same rate that when they're adolescents, you know, just for a little time period to get them started in their childhood. And I would imagine that is what creates many issues in the education world, where you have a little girl who doesn't get the same amount of testosterone at that time and can sit crisscross, applesauce and listen for how long.
I thought that was ADD.
It is.
I've been told that.
Let me flip through the DSM-5 and see what pharmaceutical company said the diagnosis is supposed to be.
Exactly.
Exactly. That is 100% accurate.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is a lot true.
Sad.
That's probably another episode we should get into.
Boy, couldn't we?
Yeah. But the ability, I think, in what you're describing, Ro, I definitely have a similar experience in my practice in that I see a female client. If I say something that isn't true, they're able to pretty calmly say, no, that's not true. That's not it.
Yeah.
And they stay curious.
Yeah.
If I make that mistake with a male client, they're like, that's not true.
Or the worst. Oh God, the worst. I would much prefer the reactive, overblown guy. I really would. Because they're, to me, that's just like a big baby. I just don't want to get punched in the face, right? Like I can handle your outbursts. I literally want you to express something, right? Just not at me per se. At the same time, though, like the worst and the ones that scare me the most as a therapist is when you make the offensive statement or what is perceived to be offensive or truth, and they get silent. And they go either red face, you could watch the blood just start to boil, it goes like right at their neck into their forehead or something, or they get quiet and shut down. And then they literally look out the window, or they check the clock, or they do the, hey man, I'm F this, I'm done. Those are a little bit more problematic because they, like we're in therapy. I go to the Russian proverb, like the same water that hard boils an egg is the exact same water that makes a potato soft. It really ain't about the environment. And if you think therapy is a place where you feel threatened or you feel some sort of exposure, like, oh, buddy, what must your life be like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like therapy's the safest place. Like literally, I can't talk about anything outside of the room.
Well, and certainly, what you see in that hour session is all of those things happening, and you just sitting there looking at it, observing it. You know that you can multiply that by 1,000 out there.
Yeah.
If they're doing that in front of you, sitting on the couch, you can bet your bottom dollar that stuff is happening a whole lot in their other relationships. Yeah, and I just in my own journey, in my own therapy, I had a great therapist. Eve and I are together, sitting on the couch, and my gig, my man superpower was just shut down, pout, sulk, go in the corner, suck your thumb. That's every man's great superpower.
This wasn't the hate seat at your house. This was the professional seat.
Yeah, that's different. This was on the couch. This was the real deal. And so and of course I'd been seeing Dr. Doug Rosenau individually, and so Doug knew me pretty well, and he knew my gig, and so Eva said something in counseling, and what did I do? Oh boy, I invoked my man superpower, and I just shut down. Elvis has left the building. I mean, I was there, but I wasn't there. And of course he sees it, and just immediately he looks at me and he goes, "Ron, you're doing it again." And I'm like, "What?" Because I'm not doing nothing. I'm not doing anything. I'm not saying a word. He goes, "Yeah, exactly. You shut down, and that's the problem." And pissed me off at first. But
I imagine it did.
Yeah. But because he's doing it in front of Eva. Oh my God, she's going to use this. You know how that goes. And but I'd sat there for a minute and it's like, okay, I think Doug actually cares for me. I think he has my best interest at heart. I think I can trust him. And maybe I should just receive that.
And to that point about being offensive and where to go with that and how to take it. I think that if you're seeing a male therapist and you're a guy, if he's a good male therapist, it's usually the first real attachment that you have to a male, typically, like that is not your dad. Because even with your dad, they don't necessarily see you. They don't really,
except for your dad, right?
Of course,
present company excluded.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But they don't. Well, that's the thing, right? They don't you don't really have like this whole safe approach to masculine energy or something, if you want to call it that, where you don't really pick up on what it means to be cared for as a man. And to be cared for as a man is to be pushed, to be able to see yourself to do the impossible. And, since we talked about World War II, I mean, that's when I watch those documentaries. That's where my brain goes. Yeah. I'm like, we really are, men are made to do the impossible. We are even like Marcus Aurelius, that's one of the great quotes of him is like he struggled with depression as the emperor of Rome and having to leave the empire to his horrific son that is pretty well portrayed by Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator. But in real life, I think he's worse. Way worse. Definitely. Way worse. And him in Meditations writing in his diary saying trying to motivate himself to be like, am I made to feel the warm blankets of these sheets, or am I made to exert myself? Is my body made to literally do something? And I think that's kind of maybe we'll say the feminization of male that's happened in modernity, where, I think the correction is probably good intentions to where maybe we don't have to be so pushy and aggressive and things like that, but it's like overcorrected to where now you must be equal. And physiologically, men and women are wildly designed differently. And so when a good male therapist, when you're sitting with them, that's what they're doing. They're caring for you by hey, I see you and you're not doing well. you need to do better. And here's an idea of how to do better. And not those words per se, but I mean, that is ultimately, I think, one of the kind of major barriers for men to go to counseling is they go to a therapist and if it's a guy therapist, he sides with a wife, it's like an immediate, I've let her down again. Here we go again. And then you have the other therapist being like, yeah, you did. You did. You're right. I did a good job.
That's good thing I'm here.
Good thing I'm here to help you guys figure out how to be a man.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I often say is that I believe that a man's maturity is measured by his ability or his inability to receive feedback from safe and trusted men. Yeah. And you see that all the time, It's like, hey, here's some feedback. I care about you. I love you. And I'm just, being honest with my observations, what I see and how I experience you. And boy, guys, I've seen guys get terribly offended and it, doesn't go well. But that's a maturity issue. Yeah.
It's similar to that feeling when speaking of, you bring up World War II and the Stoics.
I can't help it, I'm sorry.
That's right. I'm going to bring up American Idol.
Oh heck yeah! Even better.
Well, you're watching these people parade in and they start to sing, and you instantly know no one has ever been honest with this person.
Yeah,
and it's sad to watch.
Yeah. Simon, love Simon.
Yeah, it's entertaining, but also kind of sad. And when you see somebody meander into a therapy setting. And you realize, oh my gosh, no one has ever been honest with this person, And then on our side of the coffee table, to soldier out and have the courage to be the first person to be honest. And this is why I think our training is so important because, you can be honest like a sledgehammer, or you can be honest in a caring way, which, Ron, take a break. We'll have this, Ron and I'll have this conversation.
That's why I have Eva in the room.
That's right.
Right.
There is some nuance to this feedback. There are rules of engagement to this feedback, right? So we're not abdicating here on this podcast, flippant honesty, because that can certainly be just as damaging as withholding the honesty, right? I'm struck by, though, in our sacred text of Christianity, we hear that we're going to know the truth, and it does not say that the truth is going to make us comfortable, but it does say that the truth is going to set us free.
Yeah.
And I would say that we probably all would submit that is the greater ideal, to experience freedom in life instead of to experience comfort in life. This is where we run against the grain of our culture, though, because the largest ideal, I would say, in 2024, especially in America, and I would assume around the world. Shout out to you, Australia. I know you're listening to us.
Yes.
I might.
That's right. The largest ideal is comfort.
Yeah.
I think, which allows me to extend a certain level of compassion to my client base. You are swimming in the water of comfort. That's what you're used to. That's what you're out for. And through this feedback, I am introducing something that is uncomfortable. So you're going to be disoriented. And that being disoriented in front of me is a lot safer than being disoriented in front of your spouse, your boss, your children, at least for the first time. Eventually, though, I would want to produce, as someone who's in relationship with me in a professional relationship, the ability to be disoriented and uncomfortable in front of a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because you can steel your resolve against that, and this is just a normal part of living, is experiencing feedback from other people that makes me uncomfortable.
I mean, I think you bring up maybe the biggest problem in our culture across the board, especially in Christianity, but definitely in America and probably the world too, of the comfort thing of like, think about what our culture does here around just death, which is like the most fact thing about life ever. Like there's literally no escaping it. You can't outrun it. You can't, there's nothing at all that you can do about dying. Like you could have the nice morose statement that my buddy Andrew makes to me all the time. So it's like, just one more step in the grave as he's literally walking on a trail with me. It's like, that's
heavy.
You're right.
We should talk about that.
Okay, cool.
We need to get him on the podcast.
I know, it'd be great. But like, that's the thing. Like, it's true, right? But if we're not comfortable with death, you avoid it completely. And look at how we deal with it. We, especially here in the old South. I mean, like, somebody dies. Is there any mourning period? Like a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and then they're like, get them dead, get them buried, before they get, warm again or something.
Yeah.
Like they
I know what'll fix this: a suit and a casserole.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And then that's it. Right.
Done.
And you compare that.
Well, you have to make them a saint when they die.
Yes. Yes. And you have to like talk about all their accomplishments and all this stuff or whatever, and you get this like caricature of an individual that is digestible and comfortable, when it's like, well, no,
which blocks grief, by the way.
Yes,
and it's dishonest.
That an individual, like just a person, since we love individualism in our country, like just a person, not all people, but just a person is really complex and really difficult to understand. Like we are wildly weird, And I think about that of how we've just kind of like anesthetized death, where it's just like this almost safe thing for us versus like other cultures, like India has a whole city called Varanasi that is the city of death, where right now, every second, every day, they are burning bodies nonstop at the Ganges River, nonstop. We go to that town, apparently, I've never been, but when you go to that town, you are sometimes stepping over dead bodies that are in line for the relatives to bring to like turn into ashes and I guess give back to the river or whatever the belief system is, like that they've been doing that for thousands of years in their culture. And so for us as foreigners to go to a place like that and look at it with disgust or to be like, oh, gross, nasty. I'm also told too that my buddy who went said that the bodies smell like barbecue, which kind of ruined barbecue for me. Where I'm like, I don't really want to eat.
Well, thanks for passing that along.
Oh gosh,
Right?
Gee
never eat
whiz.
barbecue again.
And I was hanging with you in the whole death story. And
Right.
Now I'm
You lost
offended.
me. Yeah,
Now you're uncomfortable,
That's right.
right?
I don't
Now you
like
can't
it.
have your
I don't
pork.
like it.
You can't have your dirty pork.
There's literally from this studio, like literally a 50-yard walk. There's a barbecue joint.
The best
one of the
barbecue
best
joint
ones in Mississippi. Yeah,
But see, that
Shout out.
culture organizes around all of making death a part of life, you know? And when I think of what we were talking about earlier with, you know, being born again and Nicodemus and that kind of stuff, like, well, that's what that means. It doesn't mean like, hey, you got to be a new little baby. Like, no. You have to incorporate like your death into your life, and you probably should live like it's your last day. And in your last day, what do you want to be? What do you want to be seen as? What do you want to do? What do you want to blah, 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 blah. And that's where it comes for us. I think that's probably one of the, biggest barriers of like, well, I just don't want to offend him. You know, I want him to like me. I want him to, you know, understand. You know, I was like, well, that's okay, cool. I don't understand death, and it's like I accept it. You know, you don't have to like somebody. You don't have to be liked. And I look at even especially guys. Oh my God, especially guys. They're so desperate to be seen, so desperate to be liked, so they wildly don't want to offend. And maybe they don't want to offend because they don't want to get punched. I don't know. You know, and they step on that. But then there are those of us as men who are like, I can take a punch.
Yeah.
You know, and to be honest, I'd rather take that guy. That guy is a little bit more workable than the person who is constantly in their head, constantly like trying to justify something that's probably not that justifiable and never going to understand, you know? And I think that's where the offense comes in of like, what are you wasting your time on talking about your wife with me for? She's not here.
Yeah.
She's fine. She's at home taking care of the kids. Cool.
Do you think this would explain, where, you know, that moment where you realize you just opened Pandora's box? It's interesting, though, the conversation we're having. We are certainly willing to offend.
Yeah.
We are not willing to be offended.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Of course.
We are comfortable slinging it out there because that's directed at someone else. That is a very effective method of avoidance. Like, I will offend you, and that will push you away. That will get you away. You know. But submitting to offense, and it's interesting, even in our culture today, and man, the political scene in America, just the scene in America, maybe we should say.
Yeah. Right. What isn't political is probably the right question.
Jesus, come back now.
Exactly. Yeah. Jesus 2024, right? I'm offended. Yeah.
No, you offended me.
But the fact that we have embraced, we will be the first one.
Yeah.
We'll be the first one to offend. And then we've got the overcorrection of the inclusion laws. And we just can't offend because we're being so aggressive with our offense. But I would propose today that a part of that is because we just haven't included it in our palette as human beings. You know, we have pushed all offense to the side. What I do enjoy, the part of the conversation I enjoy the most that happens, and we reference this a lot. If you're confused by this language, go back to our intensives episode. But at Deer Camp, and we experience multi-generational environments. Those are also disappearing thanks to Steve Jobs and his AirPods, right? We are not in environments where we are forced to interact on the family farm or in the city blocks with people who are older than we are and have a much different perspective on the world than we do. I mean, I can remember as a child watching my grandmother wash tinfoil and Ziploc bags. Right? Sitting at the sink. She was rinsing them out and she put them in the drying rack. I'm like, man, she has snapped, you know? And I asked my parents for some interpretation of that. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you reuse? Why would you go buy more when you could just reuse that? There was nothing in it but some carrots or whatever. That was her life experience on display in front of me. And I got curious about that and asking questions. Now, there are shadow sides to growing up in that time in American history as well. Yeah. So I'm glad we've made some progress. But I think part of our problem is we're not placed in multi-generational environments where offensive things just happen because they're normal to people like, for instance, Roan's age.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's just normal activity.
Yeah,
right?
I get it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the difference between Copenhagen and Zen, right?
What a great analogy. Listen, Zen is not a sin. I'll say that right now.
Did you notice how long the setup was for that?
That was a great. That could
Nice
have done
job.
that better. That was mastered.
As we were talking, and I don't know, I mean, maybe offense is the right word because, it is that. But maybe it is confront because, the word confront just simply means to face. And, I think what we're trying to do is just get people to face their issues, their problems, and mostly themselves. And so, and that's as Ro was saying earlier. I mean, that's a scary, daunting endeavor for anybody to like actually tell yourself the truth and then begin to tell others the truth. But you've got to face that in order to change. You got to face that fear.
I think that's why Patrick Carnes titled the books "Out of the Shadows," right? Because you got to come out of the shadows first to even see that you're in the shadow. And then the next workbook is called Facing the Shadows, which is the first 7 steps of the 30 tasks that you have to do to be in recovery. And that book is like, 2 inches thick.
It's a big book.
It's a big book with lots and lots of things in it that are great resources, but it's a big piece of work.
I've given that to guys before, and it's like, I mean, most guys won't read a book, period. And I didn't give them crayons to color in it, but it is like 2 inches thick, literally, and it is daunting. 30 tasks, and each one of those
more after you're done with that.
Each one of those has a subset. And it's like, oh gosh.
Ah, okay. But I think even when he did that back in the day, part of the strategy around that and the thinking is that like we need something to do about it. We need something to do. We need to confront. We have to offend. We have to feel the strive. And you think about working out, just that alone, since that's been my year this year of my story from my injury that sent me into a deep, dark depression. And then realizing that like, I'm kind of doing this to myself. I probably should start getting in shape. Like just because I busted my Achilles doesn't mean I'm dead. I need to I got to do other stuff. So I hit the gym. And if you never hit the gym in like a decade, this weird thing happens where you go like, I kind of like this. This is not bad. Why have I wasted 10 years of my life and I go to the gym?
Yeah.
And you do it and you learn that how to build muscle and how to stay in shape is you tear it down and you make your muscles uncomfortable in their movements and you isolate the muscle. You literally, whichever muscle you're trying to work on, you're trying to get it to not feel comfortable, and what happens, obviously the fibers and tendons in your body start breaking down and they reinforce with all sorts of good, stronger material, if you will. The same principle applies to anything in recovery, anything in depression work, anything in anxiety work. You gotta be uncomfortable. You gotta be comfortably uncomfortable. And I don't know what's more uncomfortable than like being offended, And in my practice, I really try and make it a really good habit of asking people, did you like what I'm saying? I want you to tell me no. I want you to give me a rebuttal. I want you to tell me whatever it is that you're actually thinking. You don't have to impress me. It's better for you to be honest and say, this sucked. You suck or whatever. Yeah. Than it is to be like, wow, I got a lot out of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I use a similar tactic in that I just say, does that make sense to you? Does that feel correct?
Right.
Does that feel true?
Yeah.
Am I off in this?
Yeah.
Because often you have to pull people out and give them the opportunity to be vocal because they're just so used to being overrun. I mean, I can just hear now all the codependents listening. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't
have to do this.
I'm
never going to therapy
ever." Yeah, like I do not.
Or I'm going to find a really codependent therapist, and there's a lot of those out there.
That's the reality. There's somebody out there for everybody.
Most of our therapy world, that's what you get.
Yeah, especially in the Christian therapist.
Oh man, that's
yeah. That's again, we keep stumbling on episodes.
Yeah,
but
there's another one.
People who go to seminary or people who go get their
Cemetery?
masters.
Did you say cemetery?
People that go get an education to fix themselves and then find themselves in the helper position. Oh boy.
Oh, buddy.
Oh, boy.
Oh, man.
There's the story.
Yeah. But we are exposing a pretty critical part of this in the feedback is, and maybe I'll be the only guy in the room, to be honest, but
Definitely.
Probably so.
I just throw a little shade there. When you reach out there and produce that honesty and offend someone and they don't like you as a result, I mean, you've got to be pretty secure in who you are.
Amen.
To be okay with someone literally going 2 rooms down the hall at the therapy practice.
Right, exactly.
To sit with someone else. I love that experience where you go out to the waiting room and you're like, wait, are you? I don't. And then they're there to see someone else.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's so wonderful. It's like the way I experience that, because that happens all the time in our practice, to where like we have great therapists in our practice. There ain't a bad one up there. So like, I'm not for everybody and everybody's not for me. And I'm wildly okay for that, and more than likely they're going to have a therapist on our staff who's going to be for you.
I tell people all the time, it's like, look, you have to have affinity. There's got to be a fit. And if I'm not the right guy, man, I'll help you. I can send you to 20 other people.
Right.
And
I ain't afraid to do it.
Yeah, I'm for that,
I remember in graduate school, you talk about like being offended and stuff. I had to do what's called a MARC paper, which is a big research paper for this class I was in. And it's like a big fat research paper, like 30, 40, 50 pages, maybe like, 50,000 words or something. And you have to go do research in the field. And I picked, at the time I was interested in equine assisted psychotherapy because you get to work with horses, and I was like, oh, heck yeah. I think I watched The Horse Whisperer and was like, I'm going to do that, dude. Like, I got this, right? One background for Roe Hunter here. I grew up in suburbia. Like, I did not grow up on a farm.
In Atlanta.
I did not ride horses.
We literally just had a 10-minute conversation off mic about REM.
That's me. I'm driving around the streets of Ackworth, Georgia, like in my Isuzu rodeo. Like, ain't no trucks or boots.
That's as close as you got to the rodeo.
That's about right. That's it. That's the closest horse I ever rode is my Isuzu, And I say that because I pick this equine assisted psychotherapy because it sounded cool and mostly manly, and I was like, that'd be dope. I mean, I can go check that out. And there was a place in town called Equine Solutions or something like that, run by a psychologist named Tim Risler, who I think might still be in the area. But I go out there one day and I need to interview him, and he says, yeah, absolutely, but I want you to like participate. And I didn't really know what that meant. I thought that was like, I'll observe him doing a session. No. He was like, you're going to do it. And I was like, oh, like, what do you mean? And he's like, you're going to do therapy with the horse. And so the thing that he was getting me to do was to take there's 3 buckets that he put feed in each one of them. And he said, I want you to think about 3 different struggles in your life right now that you're having a hard time with. And I want you to label the buckets. And I don't remember what I put. I probably put like something, can't find a woman.
Relationship with dad.
Relationship with dad, right. Or, scared of the future, anxiety. I probably put anxiety. I definitely put anxiety. And he was like, I want you to take the horse without touching it, without doing anything to it. You're not allowed to touch it. You're not allowed to push it. You're not allowed to get a piece of carrot or something and like lead it. You have to partner with the horse, and you have to go to the bucket that you want to work on the most today. I couldn't do it. It was so challenging to be able to like, all right, what would you do with a horse to make it move? Hey, horsey, here, come here, come. Well, I don't know what I was doing. Like, I'm probably an idiot. I'm sure he was laughing. And I'm struggling through it. About 30 minutes. He's like, all right, I think that's enough. And he says, well, let's talk about your experience. And we sit down, and he's like, so you want to do this with people, huh? You want to do the equine assisted stuff with people? And I was like, I think... I'm not so sure now.
Not after today.
He said, he goes, I wanted to do this with you to show you how difficult this is and to show you how you're really not ready to do any of this yet. And I looked at him like, whoa, that was really honest. I was like, uh-huh. So I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not ready for it. Okay. What do you mean? I literally said, what do you mean?
It's his version of sucks to suck, right?
Pretty much. He's like, yeah, always be yourself unless you suck. So I said, what do you mean? And he goes in his very nice way about it, I guess, of being like, well, see, you're in graduate school, and a lot of people in your cohort, in your graduate school, mind you, he don't know anybody in my cohort. Nobody's even heard about this guy. I looked him up. Nobody had heard of him. My professors, nobody. He said, you're in this graduate program with all these people that are only there to fix themselves, including you. And I looked at him and I was like, nah. Nah, man. Nah. Our silence was just like so jarring to where and that was basically the end of it. That I remember getting in my car and like driving back to my house and being like, he's right.
He's right. Yeah.
He's exactly right. He's like, really, like, I'm really not ready for this. Like, I don't even know what I want to do. I don't like, and of course, anxiety row takes over and is like, well, yeah, you'll never know what to do. And it's always going to be bad. And you should probably quit this. And you should and just panic, of like, oh no. And what he offered me that day, and this is probably my first semester in school. What he offered me was a real life version of being seen and where you're actually at. It's like, no, you could do this, but not anytime soon. Right. And then also he's like telling me too, that like, yeah, you can't afford to do this. So you have to like have a barn, and you have to have a horse. You have to know how to be around horses, and you have to like understand a horse, and you have to like know horses, and you don't have resources, money, availability to do any of that. You didn't grow up around it.
There's a whole lot of truth in that one statement.
In the one statement, to where I remember even taking that to my therapist at the time, being like, am I not good? And of course my therapist was like, you're great. You're the best.
Wait a minute. Was Eva your therapist?
Yeah. No, his name was Phil Harden, actually. No, I'm totally kidding.
You bring up an interesting point. I very much want to highlight this because it's a crease, but it makes a big difference. The fact that there was a delay between the delivery of that truth and your ability to let it kind of soak in.
Yeah, I didn't want to. I'll tell you that.
It was poured on the top of the soil, but it took a minute to get down to the roots. I feel like this is another part of this feedback process we should talk about more. Yeah. Is that we figure if we can't immediately discern that it's true, it must be false. That's not how that works. No. And this links back to our discussion on intensives and the 1 hour in a therapist office. It's why these intensives or these weekends are so powerful, because the truth is delivered to you, in community, in a relational context, which is awesome. But you have some time to let that truth kind of seep down to the roots. And you're able to like be pouty and offended while everybody else is at dinner and you're faking like you're on your phone or something. And then, then you're able
to... meddling here, Ben.
Yeah. Then you're sitting in the movie and you're watching this epic, heroic movie with soldiers doing wild stuff around the world. And all you're thinking about is, Ben hurt my feelings. That's not true. My wife was right. I should have stayed home. Right. But the next day, something happens. If you can just stay with the tension and refuse to resolve it and let the resolve come to you, right? Mm-hmm. And let the community continue to speak that truth, then something happens that changes the heart of a person, and you never go back. You will never go back. You know what's so funny to me is that we've mentioned Phil Harden a few times.
I love him. Because we love him.
Yeah, he's probably the guy on the planet that offended me the most.
Of course.
Yeah. And it's amazing that he connected with reality long enough to offend me. but he did. Yeah. And I stayed...
blind squirrel.
Man, I stayed offended by that guy for a number of months. Sure. Of course I was nice and cordial to his face because we're Southern, right?
And you're still pastoring. You got paid to be nice.
That's right. Yeah, professional nice. I actually have a master's in nice. It was 96 hours from Baylor University. But I was so willing to discuss with other people the truth that Phil delivered to me. I never talked to Phil about it until I finally got some feedback like, man, this is probably the 19th breakfast that you've mentioned Phil offending you. Maybe you should talk to Phil about this. I'm like, yeah, that feels accurate, right? But there's kind of a serve and volley, right? But we exit out of the tension. We want to move over and gripe to other people. We want to victimize ourselves. And,
that's right.
Everything interrupts this process. But being able to, you had a moment in your Isuzu rodeo where you
Riding
know
a horse.
the windshield delivered the truth to you, right down to a soul place, as you're contemplating it. I think we should challenge here at this point our listener base to say that it is definitely average to escape the tension by just determining that something that's probably actually true is false because we couldn't initially agree with it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, dude, like our last intensive that we did, there was a young guy there who all I saw was me. He was young, under 25 or something. And he was struggling mightily. He was like presenting a story. Part of what the exercises that we get guys to do is like, you got to go over your, timeline of your sexual history. And that's kind of step one. And then you kind of really need to use your sexual history timeline to put together like your trauma wall, as we say it. And truly, he really struggled with connecting. And then he's getting up in front of us and he's sharing his trauma essentially. And as he's sharing, he's like, I think all of us were just worn out, as he's sharing, because he's like, he's just explaining, I'm doing it right. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? I'm doing it right. I'm doing it. Just not like, didn't even take a breath hardly to where now I'm sitting closest to him. And I think my dad is over in the back and dad's noticing it. I'm noticing it. Like he's having a panic attack.
Yeah,
it's about to happen. He is literally about to fall out because he's worked himself up. And as it's happening, right, I make him stop telling a story. Hey, we see you. Stop. And I walk through essentially with him in front of everybody else a way to deal with tension. It's a guided meditation, if you will, a breathing exercise. I think it actually is called a grounding thing that literally you start at the bottoms of your feet, you feel the ground, you focus your mind on your legs, and you work your way up into your brain, And what was interesting about this is that you could tell this dude, and his story too, he never was allowed, he never gave himself permission, nor did I think his parents allowed him to sit in tension, to sit in the anxiety, to sit into the kind of like what his body's trying to tell him. They would either probably spiritually dismiss it and tell him that it's like Satan or something, or they would just dismiss it like totally. It's like, well, that's not real. That's not true. That's not happening, right? And that was the first time ever, and he even communicated this. So first time ever that like a whole group of guys, like I think maybe we had 20 at the last, like 20 guys sitting around him and just kind of walking with him, being like, hey, yeah, you're here. Just sit there, right? And the rest of the weekend after that, his demeanor, his attitude, his perspective, it was weird how quickly it switched to where he was like, oh, I think I might have some trauma. Like stuff like that. When you're like 22, that's
I may have anxiety.
It's like a big deal. Bad things might happen to me.
Yeah. All right, Ron, final word from you.
Oh, man. What a great discussion. And my takeaway is we need to call Pig and Pint to get them to sponsor the show at the barbecue place here after Rove ruined barbecue for us.
So sorry. India special.
We'll give a shout out to them.
Varanasi special, baby.
It's certainly, just in the growth process. I talked about it in my own journey. Being part of growth is being offended, being confronted with the things that we all need to face. Because otherwise, if nothing changes, nothing changes.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.